Hello my friends, and welcome back. I'm Eddie Pride from Milk and Cookies Total War, and if you celebrate, happy Thanksgiving morning to you and yours, and what better way to usher in the festivities than with the old turkey carver himself, the demonic, the hellish, the furious Skulltaker, and his Slayer sword. Hope that blood is pumping. Today, we're talking campaign mechanics, Khorne legacy updates, and a closer look at the new units coming on the Khornate side of the roster. There are some incredibly cool designs and close-ups of the characters and models with a lot of further detail on the strategic side, so let's jump right in. Albrecht, oh my god, leave him alone! Number one, we don't have any official start position for Skulltaker yet, but if the teasers are any indication, he'll be starting in Lustria, near Gorak, and Bordello, or the Bordello colonizers, as it were. And for once, the neighbors of the Great White Lizard will not be so brutally pounded into submission straight from turn one. There are quite a few factions in the game that can struggle with early Saurus spam and an immovable force like Dwayne Gorak Johnson, but most won't ever experience that fearsome reputation of the Bocktide because they don't start near any Lizardmen lords. I'd say it's actually one of those army archetypes that the AI can handle really well and could be a big problem. If you've played Khalida before, poor lady certainly knows that all too well. Across the planet in the Southlands, she's dealing with that, and Thorak and Krotgar, using only Skelly Boys. Makes it really difficult for her at the start of her campaign, and Clan Pestilence typically has to rush Plague Claw Catapult to get something done that can handle them, and still doesn't answer Gorak himself. Lazul Skulltaker, on the other hand, shouldn't have a problem at all with any of his starting neighbors, because that roster is extremely well suited to dealing with Bretonnia or Lizardmen, especially after this update. Croak still has the potential to poop on you if the AI somehow manages to use him well. He's a demonic infantry deleter with his pizza deliveries, but Skulltaker and a Blood Reaper by themselves should really beat the brakes off any hero or lord, especially if they're on foot in the early game, and Gorak certainly falls into that category. Bloodletter spam with a few mobile elements to hammer and anvil should smash Saurus, and ease of access to bonus for large Khorne Gores and Chaos Warrior Halberds means the starting units for Albrecht shouldn't be too scary either. Don't know all the details yet, obviously, but I feel like he's well situated to cut the heart out of Lustria. Now, I know some of y'all were wondering, because it wasn't shown in the trailer, yes, Skulltaker will have access to his Juggernaut mount Kultairan, so mobility shouldn't be an issue, but purely from an aesthetics perspective, I might elect to keep him on foot just to enjoy those sync kill animations and decapitations, which we'll lose entirely if he's up on top of a mechanical war rhino, as cool as it is. In battle, he'll have 3 innate augments. The Slayer Sword, crafted from a single shard of Khorne's Boundless Wrath. It's a blade that blazes with unholy energy and has an uncanny ability to find the foe's weak spot, applying dazed contact effect, reducing an enemy's weapon strength and AP while bolstering his own. The Cloak of Skulls is a passive that grants a large ward save and spell resistance, and Bloody Onslaught further increases his AP damage and gives him immune to flanking, which may not mean a whole lot on foot. He has a low profile there, although he is a duelist, so it'll be nice to not be taking flanking penalties when you're, I don't know, fighting Karl Franz. But astride the Juggernaut with that bigger hitbox, actually one of the more important reasons why that mount and Jugger units in general aren't that good is how big they are. They're usually in base contact with a lot of stuff. They're just getting chunked from the side and from the rear. Then that immune to flanking trait on Kultairan could make a more noticeable impact. His main campaign mechanic is the Cloak of Skulls. 10 disembodied craniums from vampires to orc war bosses to once defeated chaos war chiefs that has some cool flavor text in the top left, arrayed in the symbol of the Slayer that all have various effects and can be imbued with champion essence to become even stronger. Champion essence will be the main resource you're trying to farm outside of skulls. We'll talk about those momentarily. Skulltaker is a mighty duelist. Naturally, you'll be encouraged to seek out the strongest warriors on the planet and add them all to your trophy collection. Presumably, higher level and more important legendary lords will grant more champion essence, which can be used to do some pretty powerful stuff like teleporting to an enemy army, massively boosting your XP gain, or reaping even more skulls on the campaign map, which is going to be a much more important resource now. More on that in a moment. The Skull of Tong Chieftain Mir the Indomitable, for instance, lets you fast travel to visible lords at the cost of skulls, so with some clever hero manipulation, sending those out early and often to far corners of the globe, you can branch out far and wide and strike at any corner, anywhere. You see Khalida over in the Southlands and you're up in Nagaroth, well, you can presumably teleport straight to her, kill her, and start doing some stuff down in the Southlands, which is pretty awesome. I do love me some teleport mechanics, and for Skulltaker, it's very thematic. It should make for a very replayable campaign, as the world is your oyster when you're a teleporting demon who can ravage any continent out of nowhere. You certainly won't have to stay in the Battle Royale Blood Bowl of Lustria if you don't feel like it. But it's hard to talk Skulltaker if we don't talk the base violence necessary for change, and the Khorne Legacy updates should change the Blood God in some very important ways. Yes, that was an Arcane reference. I'm still shooketh, haunted by that show's beauty and despair. Season 1 is an absolute masterpiece. Season 2 was a bit rushed. I do have some issues with it, but I still loved it, and I will be watching anything Fortiche and Riot work on at this point. Great effing show, the gorgeous animation, music, and some decidedly cornate moments in Season 2, if you know what I'm saying. If you haven't watched it on Netflix, highly recommended. I don't even play League, and I absolutely adored it. Anyway, just like the Cloak of Skulls, there are now 10 actions available on the Skull Throne, which will be available to all Khornate Lords, not just Skulltaker. And now, instead of just stockpiling millions of them, they can be spent to do some very spicy stuff. Expect the lower tiers of the Skull Throne to include basic army upgrades, growth, control corruption, that sort of thing, but the higher tiers of the throne will naturally unlock some really powerful and thematic abilities, the kind that can be game-altering. I've seen a few of them. I honestly don't even remember what they were and couldn't share them right now even if I could, but I remember being like, holy shit, some of those seem really impactful. Keep an eye out for the Skull Throne. It's a much more interesting mechanic now. Unholy manifestations, of course, have been widely criticized, and rightly so. I still have no real idea what governs the speed of progression when it comes to that meter. I know it's supposed to be based on how much corruption your god has spread, but it seems completely divorced from any of the actions I undertake on the campaign map, and I don't think I've ever played deep enough into a campaign to unlock even the 4th tier of manifestations. Maybe once or twice, but I don't remember it for any of the monogod factions. But yeah, I mean, by turn 80 or 100, it's sometimes only like halfway through that meter, even when I own a quarter of the planet and all of my regions are completely corrupted in whatever my god's flavor is. So I end up not even having access to like half the mechanic before I move on to another campaign. So if they haven't made any changes on that front, then maybe these tweaks will be moot anyway. We'll throw them up on screen right now, but unholy manifestations can be upgraded, presumably as you spread more of that corruption. For example, the base version of Slaughter Incarnate grants 150% extra XP gain for Lord. The upgraded version of that doubles that to 300%. So pretty impactful changes once it's upgraded in some circumstances. No changes to cults that I can see, unfortunately. I think we knew that was coming because Nurgles and Tzeentches weren't changed either, but everything else has been at least touched on or outright overhauled, and there are some juicy changes coming. On the economic side, less of your buildings will generate passive income now, because Khorne isn't so much about empire building and the construction of banks and markets. As funny as that image might be of a healthy, functioning Khornate society going to the blood store to buy some skulls for little Timmy. Instead, most of what you build will focus on globally increasing sack, loot, and raise value generated from battles, which is, of course, where you should be earning the majority of your cash monies. It means you'll be playing in the red a lot less now, particularly because blood hosts no longer cost upkeep. Previous strategy for Khorne, of course, heavily depended on abusing blood host spawns and fighting heavily in the red at all times, because hell, if your momentum is eternal and your turn never ever ends, then you don't owe anybody anything, right? Not counting the obvious and very annoying bug where your armies would start taking attrition a turn early, which I sincerely hope they fixed. Last time I played Scarbrand, maybe like 4 months ago or something, that was hitting me a lot. You'd be getting the desertion penalties before your turn even changed over. You're obviously not supposed to get locked out of casualty replenishment until the turn has changed and your total wallet is truly in the negative, not just projected to be. But yeah, while that playstyle was certainly very unique, CA felt it was kind of one-dimensional and relied too heavily on infinite blood host abuse rather than improving your own fielded armies, which is fair and true. So they've stripped upkeep away from blood hosts, which means you won't be playing in the red, but blood hosts will now cost skulls, which will be at a premium in the early and mid game at least, because there are a lot of different things to spend them on now. It means you'll have to make some actual decisions there. Bloodletting is now less globally focused. It'll be targeted more specifically at each individual lord and their army, so you won't have empire-wide disruptions and growth malices just because Skarbrand had to chill and recruit some units for a handful of turns, and momentum should be a little bit easier to build and maintain. Resource buildings will now grant unique benefits rather than all granting skulls and income, and the mortal or demonic settlement decision will now have a much greater impact because demonic settlements will only be able to recruit demons, while mortal settlements will only be able to recruit mortals. And I'm certain there's going to be some other changes between those two on top of that. Now, one of the sickest changes coming in this update is related to that whole topic and how demonic armies function. Pretty much since their inception, demonic instability has plagued the rosters of all 4 Chaos Gods because it's generally just a big debuff that insta-kills your units and doesn't really give you any benefit. Demons don't really get any noticeable or tangible benefit for being demons. On average, they are way squishier and more vulnerable than mortals, particularly since Champions of Chaos. And crumbling is always going to be a lot worse than routing, especially when it transfers back to the campaign map and you just lost a whole freaking unit. I'd much rather have my chosen route at 15 men left than have my unit deleted from the game. When you look at the two sides of those rosters, why would I build hordes of Bloodletters when you can build hordes of Chosen, who are almost as killy, but way more likely to survive with much better morale and don't get instantly deleted the second things go wrong? Well, now demonic units can be reforged after battle. So if they disintegrate, they have a base chance to come back that will improve alongside corruption levels and technology unlocks. Low base chance initially, but increasing substantially as your campaign progresses. So if a Bloodthirster or Soul Grinder gets caught out and dies by turn 75 or whatever, there is a very good chance it'll be back as soon as you return to the campaign map. Pretty cool, especially because reforging also impacts casualty replenishment, meaning demonic units might replenish faster than mortals, at least in those high corruption areas. I really like that change. I think it's very well thought out. There's also a 3-turn grace period where other factions can't occupy raised regions, which should make passive expansion and automatic resettlement of those regions less of a headache as Khorne, and prevent random AI from blocking your empire building in that way. Now on the battle side, let's do a quick run through of each of the units and take a look at their models, because there are some absolutely awesome ones here. We've covered some of this before, so I'll keep it short and sweet and focus on the new details. But Scylla Anfengrim, the Red Rage Gorilla, fantastic model. Hairy arms and a serpent's tail. He can explode, disrupting and rampaging enemies with kill for Khorne, kind of like the Verminous Valor thing for Queek, but I think it'll actually do some damage and it will rampage them too. Passively damages all nearby enemies with his Serpent Mortis effect. He has a serpent tail that will be dealing damage passively in an AoE. He gets a stacking ward save and magic resist the more he kills in melee, and Crimson Juggernaut turns him into the Juggernaut, bitch, with glorious charge and speed improvements. So once he gets some momentum going, it's going to be hard to stop him. Scar Bloodwrath is an anti-infantry specialist, where Scylla Anfengrim is more of a mobile all-arounder who's meant for cutting through armor. Scar's abilities focus on healing through combat, regenerating through bloodthirst, and essentially having a phoenix rebirth tied to the amount of kills he's dished out. So like Tyrion, when he drops low, he'll get a life-saving burst of HP, but the more he's killed, the more he will heal from that. He grants nearby friendlies armor sundering, fatigues enemies passively, and his Bloodstorm Blades can be activated to turn him into an infantry blender. He will not have a mount. I believe he is a Footlord only, and in the trailer, he looks absolutely gigantic, like almost Minotaur size, but I couldn't tell if that was just a trick of the camera or his actual size. I've always pictured him as more of a man-sized lord or hero, but maybe he'll be more like monster size, which could be kind of interesting. I'm not sure. Here, we'll get a good look at the Blood Speakers and Skull Reapers. Very thematic and brutal models on them. They've carved runes into their flesh, which is peeling back and being replaced by demonic horns and jutting bone. Some of their lips have been carved away and partially replaced by the skull underneath. Very cool visuals there. All of it looks extremely painful and gloriously gory. But for the Skull Reapers, there's a clear disconnect between their lore and their status in the army in Omens of Destruction. Sounds like CA's aware they are high-tier elites in the source material, but that they'll be more like a middle ground between Chaos Warriors and Exalted Bloodletters now. Way more killy than Sword and Board Khorne Warriors, but less armored and not at that top of the line high-end elite price point. And that's probably just to find a good spot and niche for them on the roster instead of putting everything into like that 1200 plus gold tier. Kind of think of the White Lions for the Azure. They are elite in the tabletop, pretty much equivalent to Phoenix Guard, I believe. Rather, Swordmasters in terms of a veteran status, in terms of that elite status, but they're jumped down to an 800 gold price point in Total War Warhammer, just to fill out the roster a little bit better, and I expect something similar here, although Skull Reapers might be more like 950 to 1050 gold. In multiplayer, it'd be, I think, double that in campaign, because I think in this blog, they say that every unit for the core roster will be double their price point, essentially, when you recruit, compared to custom battle, anyway. I'd still expect them to have very good anti-infantry stats, but they do appear to be lacking their great weapon variant, which is a little bit sad. I'd like to see 2 different variants, a dual weapon and a great weapon variant for this unit. Maybe that's in and it's not included in the blog. I'm not sure. Wrathmongers look incredible. Some of the coolest looking infantry in the entire trilogy now. I mean, goddamn, they have an awesome model. Gonna be so much fun to play with. Like I said, they're Khornate Doomseekers essentially, except with armor, wielding wrath flails, and infused with splash attacks and demonic power. Small model count, huge HP per model, hyper elite infantry blenders, but if they get charged by something, especially if it's a larger target, they're not going to have a very good time. Blood Beasts are going to be Khornate Rat Ogres, essentially. It looks like they have the same body type and rigging as Rogers do, might even have the same animation set. Mobile, armor-piercing flankers that can death ball around Scylla and turn a battle into a monkey mash, and if they're anything like chimps, they'll go for the squishy bits first, so protect those McNuggets and eyeballs. The Slaughter Brute is such a cool single entity. Been wanting it a really long time. Its Leash special rule, the one that ties it to a Chaos Champion and allows it to take on their stats in tabletop, is implemented here as being unbreakable while the Lord is still alive. But once they die, it can rampage or rout, which means in campaign, it will functionally always be unbreakable. And finally, Khorne Gores are Vanguard Halberds that become temporarily unbreakable when taking damage. Probably in the 650 to 800 gold range if other marked beastmen are anything to go by. I expect them to become a staple of the roster and at the very least be good in multiplayer battles because they can tar pit large targets efficiently and not just terror route, in a similar vein to the Buyer Blood passive from Kislev, which as y'all know has been insanely good since launch. A cheap, relatively cheap anyway, cost-efficient halberd unit that has elements of unbreakable, very, very useful. But that's the news I have for y'all today. We'll be talking about Arbal the Undefeated and the other Lords of Omens of Destruction very soon. Let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving filled with friends and family, and I'll see you all in the next video. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.